This Saturday, we have two interesting webinars only for you. At 11 a.m., we have Kodeeswari Women Only Webinar, Investment Masterclass with Kodeeswari. And at 11 a.m., we also have an Corporate India What Q1 FY26 Earnings Tell Us About the Road Ahead by Mr. Sendil and Mr. Gaurav. What are you waiting for? Please register today.
I am talking to you on the topic Understanding Advisors Better. Whenever I see a conversation between an investor and an advisor, I am always curious to see how the exchange happens. Generally, what I have observed in my career is that the conversation almost always begins with performance. It always looks at what happened. If the performance is very good, the advisor pulls up performance and draws the attention of the investor. If for some reason the markets are not favorable and the performance is not very good, the investor pulls it up and draws the attention of the advisor. So this kind of a powwow, a back and forth, is where the conversation begins. By the time each side has ceded the other a valid point, a lot of time has already elapsed. They then have very little time to actually pursue the agenda which they met for, or the conversation is being held for, which is to deliver advice in the current context which will work in the future. When advice is rendered, that must be the primary objective. But for some reason, everybody spends time in the past and on presenting their impressions of the past. When you spend so much time on the past, you end up not being in the right frame of mind to discuss the future, and you also end up with paucity of time to have an objective discussion on what advice will work in the future. The objectivity which such a discussion warrants is almost always found to be wanting. I'm not saying it is absent, but I always felt that that objectivity could be better. To me, a really good conversation would be where a lot of objectivity is there. People take stock with that same objectivity and then place their additional observations with a futuristic bent, and that gets discussed for some time so that the advice is delivered correctly and received in a way it should be received. This can always happen better. That is my impression. And because it is suboptimal, I feel that the actions which are warranted to be carried out by the investor almost inevitably gets delayed. What should happen next gets paused. So, the advice is not carried forward into investment almost in a majority of such interactions. Then after convincing oneself, either party comes back and agrees to carry it forward. Now this consensus deficit is extremely costly in investing. If you did it yourself, the moment you are convinced, you will act. But simply because you take the help of an advisor to arrive at your decision, it doesn't mean that you must postpone the decision, because advice executed in a timely manner is critical for investment performance. So if you are going to spend so much time discussing performance or worrying about performance or debating performance, it is equally important that you don't waste time implementing and executing advice which you have received. So this time lapse which happens while you sit on judgment should be avoided. Now, how many investors actually avoid this time lapse or are always available to execute a decision without delay? This is a question which all of us must introspect as stakeholders in the advisory ecosystem. To my mind, many people don't have time to execute. And because they don't have time to execute, they delay the acceptance of the advice. They delay the process of making their mind up on the advice received. So the process is often suboptimal. There will be so many changes which will happen. Then the investor's responsibility in an advisory equation increases dramatically. His own accountability changes. This is where advisory is moving. In my mind, this seems to be quite a tall ask of an investor because they are very busy. The reason they go to an advisor is that that person will take responsibility for their well-being and their financial outcome and tell them what is to be done. Now, if that person has to wait for you to ask him to tell you what is to be done, then there is an additional layer of activity which is only going to make this process further slack. I don't know how many investors understand where this process is going or what the consequence of these changes are going to be. Effectively, efficiency, which is the hallmark of a good advisory relationship, is going to become lax, and getting the deficiency back itself is going to be the primary challenge in an advisory equation or in a relationship. This is something that I want all of you to think over, because an advisor may feel you have to do something, but unless you are constantly in touch with him, he cannot come to you and tell you what is to be done. Therefore, ask yourself whether you will actually have the bandwidth to seek that advice from an advisor, whether you can, in a timely manner, ask what you need to do and then get the right advice. This is something that I wanted to draw the attention of all of you, because the way most people look at this equation is still oriented towards the old way of how they looked at the distributor of financial products or their stockbroker. Whereas the way a registered investment advisor is expected to work is not the way the other two entities are fashioned upon. This is a completely different work ethic. This is a completely different model of work which they are expected to maintain at all times. And this is a completely different power equation where the investor's responsibility is only going to rise. So, you may have the best of advisors, but if you are not going to show so much of enthusiasm and proaction, then that entire working between the advisor and you can become suboptimal, and performance will naturally be something that has to be always worked upon. These are some of the thoughts that are definitely haunting me for a while, and I have put these thoughts in the public domain so that many of you understand the implication of changes in how we are expected to work and what it means to you as an investor. Thank you for watching this video.